Crystal George is the modern day Diana Prince, and she is my guest today. As a licensed therapist, life coach, and well being consultant, Crystal is all about helping her clients become the very best version of themselves. In fact, her passion for promoting well being and preventing burnout led her to establish her coaching business, The Mindful Vibe Wellness, in early 2022. And when she's not empowering others, you can find Crystal volunteering locally, cooking her family's favorite dishes, or enjoying a trip to the beach. Crystal, thank you for being on Diana Prince with me today.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
When I saw you were a coach, this thought just came into my head. I wanted to talk about my drinking habit with you and just have more of a lighthearted conversation and just to give you a little, background. And then you could tell me whether we dive into it or not. Before COVID, I used to have the usual weekend drink. And then when COVID went away, obviously I didn't have the schedule or anything like that. Everybody was working from home. I was working from home. I didn't have the commute or anything like that. So man, at that point I had permission. I gave myself permission to get off the little rigid schedule of having a drink on a Saturday night. And I just started, I could have a drink on Tuesday. I can have a drink on Wednesday. I can have a drink on Thursday. And there's always something on Netflix. Netflix is my
Mhm.
my addiction. And if I'm watching a show somewhere around 8 o'clock, I love to sit down with a martini. But you do that for a couple of years, right? And eventually the world starts getting back to normal, and you're like, oh shit, I can't stop. I can't stop. And up to a couple of months ago, I was still going through having us breaking free for a few days and not, having it. But, I did find it difficult. So are you okay with talking about my drinking habit? And maybe we can
Yeah.
dive to be quite
Yes.
honest. Great, great.
Now, granted, addiction is not my niche, but I do understand the psychology of it too, especially as
It's
a
like,
psychologist
yeah,
professor.
more of that. Like
We
what?
talk about this very often. But actually, this was part of our conversation this past week when we were talking about like conditioning and like through repetition for whatever reason, whether it's like through learning, whether it's through like kind of the conditioning process of like repeatedly doing something for a certain amount of time, or our body's desire for like equilibrium and homeostasis, right? That we need to find comfort somewhere, and usually we revert back to those poor coping skills that we have. And you're talking about
Yeah,
COVID, which was a lot
exactly.
going on there.
No, it was a funny thing because I have always just took some sense of pride in the fact that I could control. I never thought of myself of having an addictive personality. It's a conversation I've had with my therapist. I also have it with my doctor because I'm like, I'm sending when I couldn't stop breaking the habit, I got a little concerned. I do, the addiction does run in in my family because my brother struggled with addiction with alcohol. And even though my therapist gave me some solace by saying I don't have an addictive personality, I still went through the cycles when I was trying to break that habit. So let me tell you what my life was like before COVID. It was pretty structured, as I mentioned, pretty structured. It was the definitely during the week is it was like serious. I had to get stuff done, had to commute into work and everything like that. Everybody pretty much knows what the cycle looks like. And then, of course, on the weekend, where it was the only time to decompress. Even during the week, I wouldn't really dive into a series on Netflix
Mhm.
because it was like, oh no, if I can't enjoy it. It's just I would read. I would just dedicate the whole week towards some better sleeping pattern and so on and so forth, better nighttime habits.
Mhm.
But I didn't have that in COVID, and it was just like I enjoyed it. Believe me, and then 2 years in, I enjoyed the freedom. It was such a breath of fresh air for me not to have this cycle of going into work and coming home. And also when I have the drink on a Tuesday, it felt nice. It felt nice. I'm like, wow. Cause I know a lot of people that always worked from home and I always was a little jealous about it because I didn't have that luxury, but I'm like, oh, this is what it's like. You're left to your own devices
Mhm.
here. And I managed. But then of course, my health, I started thinking about my health and what it's doing to me. So I wanted to back it up. And then it wasn't so easy to break that habit. And it's and the cycle goes where, during what my day schedule looks like, it is literally, as I'm building this business, I would work almost 10 hours a day. And 8 o'clock, I'm looking for a way to shut down. And, and that's Netflix, and that is a martini. And yes, I'm going to put it out there. There's better ways to do it, and more healthy ways to do it, but that was my shit. And it got to a point that I just couldn't, it was a series of false starts to get it to just to have a good series of days where I wasn't drinking, because I would have this conversation would start in my head, like, well, why can't I drink? Well, you're not hurting yourself, and stuff like that. All of this other stuff, these conversations that are going through my head is basically what I want to understand, because it's just like this argument. The good girl or the bad girl, the one that's saying have the drink, the other one that's saying no, stop having the drink. Tell us about how that shit works, and why do we go through this?
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of things there. One that, you know, although it's harder to, unless you maybe get like some testing done or something, like when you start saying like whether somebody has an addictive personality or not, but just given the fact that you have a predisposition to it genetically, there's kind of like nothing that you could do about that because those are genes that have been passed
Yeah.
down to you. Now, do they stay dormant? Which for most of us, we can have control over them because a lot of those things stay dormant within us. But if they're triggered by some type of traumatic event or whatever, which COVID, I think, even though a lot of us maybe won't admit it, maybe we fared pretty good in it. And, we were able to work from home and we were doing all right and we were watching TV and looking at TikToks and stuff. So we don't feel like it was necessarily a traumatic event. But I would think so. We were watching death happen live on, TV. You're seeing the stats and the results. So it's like outside of us, there's just chaos and things going on, and we're in our bodies is trying to make sense of that. Hence, us reverting to things that make us feel good. Which, why was everybody baking? We
Yeah.
were drinking, we were watching Netflix, like all of the things. And then if you do enough of that, like through that conditioning process that I was talking about earlier, if you do enough of that, now
Comes
you got a problem.
It becomes your
It's
crutch.
part
And
it's a new routine, just
you
like
know
how you
what?
had to build up to that routine you had before. Now
As
you've created a new routine that you need to figure out.
You know what? You bring up a good point though, because I'm saying it lightheartedly, like COVID wasn't a big deal because we're so far from it at this point. And but there was a lot going on, and it was a major transition for a lot of us. So even though I was enjoying the time at home, there was a lot of shit going on. So let's put that out there. Didn't even occur to me as I was writing, as I was talking about it. But you make a really, really good point that this all happened during COVID. So it could have been coping. Yeah. Yeah. And
And trying to figure out your life because now you're off your usual routine. And again, like your body likes to be, in that homeostasis. So it's like, what can I do to bring myself back to comfort? So for
Mhm.
you, it was a martini, and I love that. but
So
but it becomes, I guess, problematic now fast forward, you're like, oh, this is not serving me well anymore.
yeah, and
How
there's
do I
got to be
shake
a lot
that?
of. I talk to other women who have the same or going through the same thing where their lives have changed drastically post COVID, and they're still trying to manage. Same thing. They didn't have the structure, so guess what? The structure is gone, and that gives them permission to don't have that glass of wine every night, whatever the imbibe is. I know it from a lot of women that they went through that same thing and are still struggling with breaking it. So, what makes a habit? Let's call it a habit for right now, just to keep it
Hmm.
simple. Addiction is a completely different topic, and not to touch on that, but what makes a habit so hard to break after you have conditioned yourself in it for years? Because it was years.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're creatures of habit, right? So we like to operate on what's familiar to us, what we can um anticipate. We like that. So I think of it like if you envision if anybody hikes or goes on walks through a path or whatever, usually there's like the dirt path that everybody is walking. That's comfortable for us, right? But what if you were to try to like deviate off of the path? Typically, there's like grass and sticks and stones and lions, tigers, and bears, whatever else might be in the woods. So a lot of us don't like to go off of the beaten path because it's like it's uncharted territory, and our habits are very much like that. Is that it takes time for that path to get there in the first place. You have to walk over it multiple times, which is like our daily routines of that repetitive nature. But I like to think that we have the power to forge new paths. Is it going to take some work? Yes, because it took some work to get the path that's already there. So you might need a lawnmower, you might need some rakes, you might need some things to,
They
to
need a
forge the
goddamn
new
book and
path.
get away from
Yeah,
Netflix or something.
so you're gonna need some things to forge the new path, but it is so. But that's the way that I look at habits: is that it takes time to get there, which is why I always tell people give yourself a little bit of grace as you're trying to embark on new things because it's not going to happen overnight.
I do like that. And that speaks to that conversation that we have in our head, especially when we fail. Like when we set, for me, the failure came from where I set my mind to, well, this week I'm not going to jump into a drink. I'm going to stay away from it and just see if I can break that habit. And by Tuesday, I would have already done both said, oh, I failed at this because here's the martini and here's the Netflix and everything like that. But
Mhm.
that I like what you said about giving you grace. And I can attest to that. I'm really happy to say that I'm on the other side of that habit where things are more balanced. And it's good. It works for me, actually. The first one was too extreme because there's nothing
Mhm.
good about drinking every day. And that is something that I told myself and stuck to it. There a balancing act on it. And I've gotten to a nice space where I could still focus on my physical side and take care of my physical side and occasionally have a martini. But I'll tell you what it did. What I did is I had to change my nighttime routine, and I had a thing that would trigger me having a drink. My thing was it was attached to watching TV, and that was literally just me telling the world I need to shut down. So my shutdown started, I replaced Netflix with a book.
Okay.
And it helped. It does help. So every time I felt I needed to try to reset that pattern, I got the best, most engrossing book I could find, and it had to be good. I had to want to go back to it, and it did help. And it was replacing what I thought was the connecting point, which was TV. And then I had to teach myself how to watch TV without a drink. Down
Mhm.
I'm on the other side of that, which is thankfully I am. But I like what you said. It does take, and we as women sometimes get hard on ourselves when we don't get success
Mhm.
on the first try.
Well, yeah, because we're meant to be, we're told we got to be super women and we have to just fake it till you make it and all those little things
Yeah,
that tell you, I'm like, no, it's okay to like be falling apart.
and it
And
is.
being that rather than thinking that we just have to be everything to everyone all the time and then nothing to ourselves.
And correct, correct. And it's about giving yourself that permission to be imperfect. And I think you say that, and it resonates with me. And oh my goodness, that there, I lost my train of thought there. So we're going to just leave that right there. So, one thing I didn't mention as well, and you touched on it, several transitions that I've gone through, all stressful because transitions just are stressful. You had the
Mhm.
COVID piece, and then launching the new business and leaving the corporate world. And although I think I managed well, it was those things made it a little difficult for me because during COVID I developed the habit, and then when I left corporate, I had another challenge in front of me. And 8 o'clock, I didn't want to think about it anymore. Yeah,
Mhm.
I didn't want to think about it anymore. So right now, since we're towards the end of our conversations, for the millions of women who may be going through this right now, maybe they picked up some other habit during COVID or whatever other life transition they went through, what advice would you give them when they're trying to break that habit or
Hmm.
replace it with a better habit?
Yes. I mean, the first part is certainly, like I said, like giving yourself grace and meeting yourself where you're at. Sometimes we have these very lofty goals and big, not that there's anything wrong with having a big goal, but sometimes we have to meet ourselves where we're at before we can go to the next level. Kind of like that rewind or that reset before we spring forward. So that's the first piece. Now, if it's a really negative habit, kind of like those poor, like we're talking about, like the alcohol and those
Yeah.
kind of things, it might be worth exploring the root of that, which is probably a deeper, because in order to shake something like that, a lot of times it's deeply rooted in like something else that you're using that as a coping mechanism. So that might be something worth investigating, whether that's if you have the skill set to do that or seeking out some help from a professional who can help you navigate why it is that you are being pulled towards this thing that's not good for you, whether it's not good for your health or your mindset or whatever. So that's kind of the first piece. The second recommendation I have is getting clear on your priorities and your role. A lot of times we're struggling with things because we're not necessarily in alignment anymore where we're supposed to be. So getting clear
Yes.
on, our priorities and our roles and the ones that are important to us too. Because sometimes we're, especially as women, we're doing a little bit too much out here in the streets, and we can only be so many places and we're spreading ourselves too thin. So if you get clear on your priorities, especially the ones that are important to you and the places that you need to be showing up, that will help you to determine what habits that you need to focus on, especially if it's like being a good mom or being a good steward or running your business and so forth. That will help you to zone in on, okay, well, these are the behaviors that I need to do to align with those areas that are a priority for me. And then the last piece is developing those realistic goals, like things that you could actually do. So if you're like, oh yeah, I need to lose some weight and everything, I'm gonna be, because I've seen everybody on TikTok going to the gym at 5 o'clock. So I'm gonna go to the gym at 5 o'clock. No, ma'am. That's not part of my ministry. Like I would fail at that, trying to go being one of the 5 a.m. girlies at the gym. It's just not realistic for me. It's more realistic for me to say, oh, I'm gonna go maybe at 10 in the morning, or I'm gonna go after work. So it's so important. I think that's a lot of times why we get discouraged, because we're trying to meet some kind of expectation that everybody else is doing. So setting some realistic goals and some action steps that you actually have the capacity to do and then execute. That's it. And if you need to circle the block again, say take some assessment after 30 days and see how you did, or after 90 days. No different than like when we're at work and stuff and you're doing the thing and then you get assessed on it after a while. I'm like, I feel like we need to do more of that in our own life, of taking assessment of how we did on a certain thing and if we need to reevaluate our method or whatever that we're doing. So yeah, make some realistic goals and then circle back to see how you did on them.
So when you say that, though, it is actually, would it be fair to say that you deal with the stress at hand by looking at what you're
Mhm.
doing and by reassessing your goals and taking care of it that way? I guess is that what it is in a nutshell? That's what I'm hearing, but I
Yep.
may be hearing it wrong.
Yep. No. So
Mhm.
identify your priorities and then take ownership of what you actually have the capacity for and then execute on that. A lot of it is just us actually taking the step to make the change rather than staying in our comfort zone. And then we keep being on the hamster wheel of chaos and confusion. So, no, get clear on your priorities, determine what your capacity is, and then create the action steps and execute. That's it.
Got it. Got it. No, and I do want to make a note on this that I had the benefit of having a therapist during this whole thing. So I didn't have, to your point, if it's something that is a bad habit such as drinking, then do get professional help with and get that sounding board. I never got to the point that I was concerned about it, except for I looked at it as a habit, but I did have somebody to talk to. through it.
Mhm.
I did have somebody that could tell me this or that about it and knew my history. And that was my therapist. So anyone who's listening to this, we're talking about it from more of a habit standpoint, not an addictive standpoint. But if you do have an addiction, you do need to find professional help.
Mhm. Absolutely. And
I
there's so
yeah.
many great resources out there, whether it's you are using like Psychology Today to find a therapist, or even just checking in with your primary care physician as like a first point of contact. And then they can either handle it if they have the expertise, or they can refer you out to some type of specialist.
Good. Thank you for that, Crystal. So I want to actually just hand you the floor. Do you have anything you want to promote? Anything going on right now that you want to highlight? Floor is yours.
I'm also in a season of transition also, which is exciting and scary at the same time. And I too had left corporate the end of last year to jump into my business and do all the things. And it did not go as I had anticipated, but we rolled
Oh
with it,
my.
you know. But here we are now, almost a year later, and I just got licensed as a therapist a little while ago. So I'm launching my private practice and trying to feel out what that looks like. So if you're in Connecticut, if you are, you can check me out there. I have take therapy clients currently cash pay. And then what else I have going on? My coaching business is still doing wonderful things. I'm a life coach for women. I have a program called Align, which is about a lot of this that we've been talking about. People who are feeling, like they're not in alignment with where they're trying to be. So it's a 6 week course with me where you get one-to-one sessions and just the information where we break down where you are, some of those poor habits that you have, and trying to put you in a better place, that you are hitting those goals and
Mhm.
living a life that you deserve and desire. So those are the two big things that I have going on right now.
Awesome. I see another podcast in our future. With
Look, I'm down to come back.
two
This was fun.
ex-corporate employees. I would love to hear about your transition, but we will save that for the next podcast. So if you want to learn more about Crystal and the Mindful Vibe Wellness, I've listed her website in the description. Do reach out. And that is the end of our talk. Crystal, thank you so much for this great conversation.
Thank you.